Greetings to all of you, dear souls. We have completed about 11 verses of chapter 1 in the previous three parts, and now we proceed with the 12th verse. So I'm going to get started now. Ashthavakra uvacha Atma sakshi vibhu Purna eko mukta chidda kriya Asango nisapriya shanto brahmatsam saravaniva. So the meaning of this verse is that the self is the one perfect, free and actionless consciousness, the all-pervading witness, unattached to anything, desireless and at peace. It is an illusion that you seem to be involved in the world. As you all know, this is a dialogue which is going on between Ashthavakra and King Janaka, and this is what Ashthavakra says in this 12th verse to King Janaka. So let's understand this verse in a little more detail. Ashthavakra explains, so if you see the language in all these verses is, you will find it, the theme is very repetitive. He's saying the same thing from different standpoints. So if you feel the repetition, this is an intended repetition. So please understand it that we need to ingrain these things into our psyche, and that's when we will be able to understand that we have to understand it from our consciousness really. And that is why the repetition is very important in these verses. Everything is approached from different standpoints, but the core point remains the same. So Ashtavakra explains here that the self is the witness. It watches everything from a distance and is in no way affected by or involved in anything that appears or disappears. It is perfect and ever free, completely devoid of any sense of doership. So we've also discussed this earlier, where Ashtavakra has explained that the cause of our suffering is the illusion that makes us feel that I am the doer, I am the enjoyer, or I am the one suffering. So the mind has created all of these false illusions, and we have identified with that falseness and gotten trapped in its workings. Now here an example is being given, a very good illustration which will make us understand this concept a little better. If you suppose you are asked to notice a movie that is going on and how we get carried away with what is shown on the screen. We look at the images that are being projected on the blank screen and believe them to be real. These images can make us laugh or cry, depending on what is being shown on the screen. We do not see the light that projects the images or the screen on which the images are being projected. But what we identify with and what we think is real is we look at the projected images, identified with them, and react and respond to them. So we identify with the characters or whatever is going on that screen in that movie. We look at that as the reality. The images we see are completely false and cannot exist without the screen. So that screen is the consciousness or the substratum for all that appears on it. What is real here? The only thing which is real is the screen, as it remains eternally unchanged, even when the images keep changing. The screen is not affected by anything that is superimposed on it. It is always the same. It accepts all the types of images which are bad and good. So the screen is inherently, eternally pure and pristine. Even if the projected images show blood stains or violence and other negative things, the screen doesn't get the blood stains or the violence on it. It just remains untainted. Even when the movie finishes and the lights go off, which is akin to physical death, the screen still remains unchanged. So what is the analogy here? The screen is the self, and the images are all the thought patterns, the emotions, the body forms, and the individual I-ness that are superimposed on that self. So as a jnani, person would know that all such superimpositions are unreal and false appearances. He remains the background self, that screen, which is eternally blissful, desireless, and actionless consciousness. So this is what is being said in this verse. So here the self is explained as being eka, or non-dual, singular. And therefore, it is ever free, or the word mukta is being used here. The consciousness or chit, it is by itself actionless or akriya. Although all actions in the cosmos are taking place in it, all movements in the world can take place only in space. But space by itself has no movement. So the space here is like that screen of the movie. Like space, which allows everything to remain in it, but itself is not involved with any of the objects, so too the self as consciousness is unattached, which is asangya. In its infinite perfection, it has no desires. Nispraha. Desires are the expressions of the vasanas. The self as the consciousness illumines the very vasanas, or the desires. In its supreme perfection, it has nothing to desire for. So the self has nothing to desire for other than itself. Since there are no desires, there cannot be any thought agitations, nor any restless activities of the body. So therefore, this great reality is in this verse indicated by the suggestive term ever quiet, which means it is shant. It is absolutely at peace. And that is what the consciousness is. Ashthavakra uvacha kuthastham bodham advaitmatmanam paribhavaya abhasoham brahmam muktava bhavam brahmamathantaram. In this next verse, Ashtavakra talks about the need to enter into meditation. He says, meditate upon the self as motionless awareness, free from any dualism, giving up the mistaken idea that you are a reflected self or an ego or anything external or internal. So the interesting thing is the first time Ashtavakra brings up this topic of meditation in this verse. Here the word kutastha has great prominence in spiritual practice. It is even mentioned in the Bhagavad Gita. So the term kuta here has three meanings, which is unchanging, a mountaintop, and mystery. And all three meanings are being suggested here in the term kuta. It is only the self which remains unchanged while everything around it changes. The self alone is the highest reality, and it alone remains hidden behind the play of Maya. So kutastha means the self, the real I. Most ancient Vedic scriptures advocate the need to meditate on the Supreme Self or the Atma, one-pointedly, without letting the mind wander into sense objects. By doing so, one can realize one's true nature. Similarly, Ashtavakra recommends that the duty of a sadhak or a spiritual aspirant must be to devote his full attention and devotion towards the self alone, unaffected by whatever changes are happening within and outside of him. So here, this is the only time in this entire dialogue between Ashthavakra and King Janaka, where Ashtavakra prescribes meditation for the spiritual aspirant or the sadhak. He says he acknowledges the need for regular practice of meditation so that the spiritual aspirant remains stabilized at a particular point and for a considerable duration. So he says there is a need for it and there's a certain value for it for a certain time to go into meditation. Once complete stability is achieved, Ashtavakra advises the spiritual aspirant to shun every form of meditation, as he feels it is then unnecessary, as the sadhak or the spiritual aspirant continues to hold this state. The time will eventually come when the self holds the sadhak. He does not need to do anything except rest in the self, his true nature. So there is a certain role that the meditation plays when you have to make it into a practice, but eventually you are able to hold yourself in that meditative state and stay in that self. So what happens is, most people, when they are asked to go on this spiritual journey, when they desire to go on the spiritual journey, they can get very lost and they can look within and keep looking for where is that self. And you can find everything, you can find your emotions and all of that, but you are not able to find the self. But the most important part to understand is that the self is always the subject and is the looker itself. The one that is looking is the self. The witness itself is the self. And that is where people get lost. So a spiritual aspirant's biggest mistake is trying to find the self, when in fact the looker himself is the true self. So in such cases, you can have a teacher or somebody guide you, because that is where you can get stuck in that void and you will kind of keep getting sunk in it, So this is the meaning of the word kutastha. And you have to understand that the consciousness starts to look at itself, and that's when the entire journey is completed. So the mental and the mechanical mental repetition of the qualities of the self is not what is meditation. An intellect that has been solved or that has been soaked with its reflections upon these suggestive terms must come to a point where it has no more any doubts to disturb it. And so it halts. When the intellect has thus reached a state of supreme serenity, if the seeker can hold his mind in a sense of breathless expectation, be alert and vigilant, ready to experience a spontaneous awakening, then the individual is at the highest state of meditative equipoise. This state of utter balance within the total oblivion of the outer happenings is indicated here by the term meditate, which is paribhavya. So the self is then viewed as the substratum for the whole universe. And in most Vedantic sutras, it is known as the Brahman, and is expressed through an individual's mind and intellect. And when it is expressed through the mind and intellect, it is called as a reflection, which is, in this sense, it can be referred to as the ego. So this is what is being referred to here. Ashtavakra uvacha dehabhiman pashen chiram baddhoasi putraka bodhoham gyanakham gena tanikritya sukhi bhava. In this next verse, Ashtavakra talks about the trap that we are caught up in. He says, "You have long been trapped in the snare of identification with the body. Sever it with the knife of the knowledge that I am pure consciousness. and be happy, my son." So it is wise to bring up an ancient tale here from India about a lion cub who was raised by a flock of sheep as an example to understand this concept a little better. So the flock of sheep, instead of his own mother, were the ones who brought up this lion cub. So the sheep were very kind and raised the lion cub, and we will call it a sheep lion here as their own. So the sheep lion grew up among them, believing he too was a sheep. He slept with them, played with them, ate grass with them, and bleated when they did. He also became as fearful as they did at the appearance of a potential threat. And years went by doing this. One fine day, an enormous lion leapt out from behind some trees and threatened the flock of sheep. They huddled together, terrified, and that is when the lion noticed the sheep lion shaking and hiding in the middle of the flock. The sheep lion was also bleating instead of roaring like a lion. So the lion asked him, "Why are you bleating like the other sheep instead of roaring? Why are you living among sheep? You are a lion." The sheep lion simply did not believe this. He had lived like a sheep all his life. Frightened, he tried to run away, but the larger lion caught him and dragged him to the lake, where he told him to look at his reflection in the water. So the sheep lion leaned over and saw his own face for the first time, and he saw that he was indeed a lion and not a sheep. And at that very moment, he realized that everything changed for him. So instead of bleating, he roared and became who he was meant to be. He was not meant to live a fearful life, following the herd of sheep and doing what they did without question. Because he was a lion, he was powerful, noble, and strong. So through this analogy, we are getting a deep insight into our own spiritual journey. And it puts a few misconceptions around the spiritual journey to rest. So let's go a little bit into this. Let's understand this a little bit more. So first of all, the word bliss here is not an attainment. It is our own inherent nature. It is our reflection, our inner nature. The lion was always a lion. He was never a sheep. And the sheep lion had misidentified itself as a sheep. So same thing we have done. We have wrongly identified with the herd mentality, which is I am so and so, the body, the mind, the intellect, the personalities, the roles, all of that, the energies. But we have failed to look at ourselves in the lake of the heart, and once we see our true self clearly, the false identification drops completely. The memory of being a sheep in the flock is no longer predominant. The same thing happens with us. And what takes over? Our inherent nature, which is in the case of the lion, it was the roaring. Our inherent nature is bliss. Bliss takes over completely. We have only to look inwards deep enough, and then we see the reflection clearly. This bliss is what you have always been. So there is no question of it coming and going. There is nothing to be attained here. It is an inherent nature that we have. So something that comes and goes is a state of mind. It's not bliss. But bliss here is referred to in Sanskrit as Sat Chit Anand, which means the bliss stays forever and it is never to leave. And what is Sat Chit Anand? It merely seems three separate words meaning existence, which is truth, consciousness, which is Chit, and Anand, which is bliss. But together they denote a very important deeper meaning, which is the consciousness which ever exists as bliss. Once you see it, you will know that you were always that bliss. It stays forever. How can it ever leave you? You realize that it was always with you in the first place. That's why if you see my YouTube channel is called You Are Enlightened, because you are already enlightened. You already are bliss. You just didn't know it. You just didn't recognize it. Just like the lion. So let's understand this concept of bliss a little bit more. So bliss is what you already are. So it is not an attainment or a becoming that is bliss. You don't become bliss. It is a continuous, ever-flowing, ever-new joy. And all it takes to realize bliss is an intense inward looking that we need to do, which is basically the analogy of the lake, wherein we look into our inner heart and away from outward sense gratifications, which is the herd mentality or the society that we are a part of. So the sheep lion's journey towards the lake represents the inward journey every spiritual aspirant or sadhak has to undertake. It is not enough to merely assume that we are already the lion, so nothing needs to be done. We have to discover that. So without looking at one's reflection in the lake, which is bliss flowing from the heart, any knowledge is mere mental knowing. Wisdom lies in direct realization. Otherwise, if we know this mentally, doubts will always persist, because it's not supposed to be a mental knowing. It is to be an inherent realization. The sheep lion has to take the journey to the lake to see its own true reflection. So same journey we have to take into our heart to understand that we are Satchit Anand already. And this is a very necessary step for everyone's spiritual quest. And only then, when you know it, it becomes as gyan or knowledge. You have to come into the knowing of it. Without firm conviction derived through direct experience, no matter how hard the sheep lion tries to roar, he will only be bleating. Most seekers on the spiritual journey do not undertake the inner journey as a discipline, or a formal meditation. And many of them who do it are easily distracted midway from the journey or drop the journey. Many can go looking for a guru and read books, try to seek a technique or an insight that can reveal the truth to them in a very short period of time, or try to grasp mental concepts and try to find the truth through these mental concepts. This is like going for fishing in a little pothole. The fish can only be found in the lake. Therefore, it is of vital importance to limit one's reading and dive into the internal world, which is dive within, into the lake of one's own heart. All doubt vanishes when this lake is reached, when this life force is stabilized at the spiritual heart. Only then can the spiritual journey be called to be complete, not before that. So there are two signs that one has reached that lake, which is at the end of the seeking. These are the two indicators you can have when you to realize that you have reached that point of looking into the lake. First is, there must be a moment when the sheep memory or the body, mind, ego is completely annihilated, and the lion consciousness or the pure uninterrupted bliss takes over. This means that the knowledge I exist cannot be of both the sheep and the lion. You can't be in the body, mind, ego and at the same time say I am Satchit Anand or I am consciousness. In that knowledge, both cannot exist. They cannot coexist. There must be a time when one finds a new reality that has emerged independent of the body, mind, ego. So it cannot be an additional identity that you develop. It has to be a completely new identity which annihilates, which completely ends the ego, mind and body identity. This means the experiencer is not at all the body, the mind or his ego. So many talk about this bliss rising and falling, the oneness experiences, alertness, mindfulness experiences, or a background self, often another mental concept. But Many people talk about all this, but none of these constitute real awakening, because they are experienced through the normal waking state, where the experiencer is still understanding all of this through the body or the mind or the ego. So this is another flaw for people who shy away from formal meditation. They have not yet gone deeper than the waking and dream states to see this true reflection. So you have to take this journey to understand this. Secondly, if you've not developed an independent identity, which is away from the existing body-mind identity, second thing to understand that you have reached this bliss point is seeking will automatically come to an end when there is no abidance by you. Rather, bliss will abide in you, captivate you and possess you. It will hold you so close to itself that the outer sense gratifications will lose their charm and effect on you. Nothing outer or inner will enchant you anymore. All forms of practice and searching will drop automatically. So you will not be looking or shopping for techniques, practice, concepts, or any other kind of spiritual routine or any other search that you've been looking for. All of that will drop automatically. And that's when you will be abiding in the bliss. The bliss which comes and goes as a glimpse is nothing but a state of mind. The temporary joy and bliss which take place when the mind gets purified through sadhana or the formal meditation and inquiry. However, they disappear too as they come from the mind. So this is another indicator. Many aspirants chase this joy and bliss and feel dejected and demotivated to pursue their sadhana when the joy and bliss eludes them, but this is a big mistake. It is here that a spiritual teacher advises the students not to bother or worry if the bliss is manifesting or not. The student is asked to let go of whatever the mind brings in, whether the mind brings in sorrow, joy, anything, to let it go and to not identify with either of them or neither of them. Simply to dive deeper without worrying about any results appearing in the form of joy and bliss. So you can't be just anticipating that joy and bliss is coming or that is the result you have to achieve. Just let go of all of this and just keep diving deeper. However, there will be no question of letting go of the bliss or Sat Chit Anand, because it will not allow you to let go. You will be powerless. Can a drunk person let go of his intoxication merely by willing it? Obviously not. So this is not to imply that drunkenness is similar in any way to divine intoxication, Sat Chit Anand. Unlike drunkenness, the state of Sat Chit Anand is a highly alert one, and its joy far exceeds that of drinking or any other form of pleasure of this world. So these are the signs to understand whether you have reached the state of Sat Chit Anand. Ashthavakra uvachaha nisangyo nishkriyo asi tvam swaprakasho niranjana ayamev hite bandha samadhi manutishthati. In the next verse, which is verse 15, Ashtavakra points to the fact that you are really unattached and actionless, self-luminous and without any taints already. The cause of your bondage is that you practice meditation. Now this is very interesting. So in this verse, Ashtavakra speaks of meditation as the cause of the bondage, while just in one of the earlier verses, which is verse 13 of this very chapter, he had advocated meditation. So this may seem like a contradiction, but it is not actually so. Ashtavakra is a complete master. He understands that many sadhaks or spiritual practitioners are far too anxious and eager to reach a meditative state. They want to reach the state through effort and seeking through the mind, which is, effort and seeking is always through the mind. However, both effort and seeking are of the mind. As long as the mind exists, there is effort and seeking. The fact is, a meditative state cannot be reached. Meditation simply happens on its own. It is not an attainment or an achievement. It is an occurrence. So Ashtavakra's instruction is not to seek anything in your meditation, but to merely observe. What starts as a looking through the mind slowly transcends that very instrument and becomes looking through awareness. This happens through a one-pointed abidance in the sense of being, or the I am. Further, here he explains that the concept of looking through the mind gets dropped along the way, and the mind gets more and more purified and subtle. The looking here has to be beyond the mind for it to be complete and total. Only then it is called deep. A keen observation and kind, loving attention to our sense of being is all that is needed. Aspirants want to reach a state, and that itself is the problem. So the sense of achievement itself is the problem. The attempt to reach a particular state is always through the mind. In truth, there really is nothing to reach. So let's understand this through these three stages. The first stage of self-inquiry. We have to learn to accept our sense of being no matter what it is. Only when you fully accept can you truly love. Can love be there without acceptance? Can you truly love without acceptance? If, for example, you have a child, you love and accept your child howsoever he may be, howsoever he seems or appears. So acceptance leads to love, and love is acceptance. This describes the first stage of self-inquiry. So you must treat your present state of beingness as if it were your own child. This is where you have to begin your relationship with your beingness, by truly and unconditionally accepting it. So the acceptance itself unconditionally is the first stage. You mentally affirm to yourself, this is my present state of beingness. I am going to completely accept it, sink into it and love it. This is the first stage. Now let's come to the second stage of self-inquiry. Acceptance does not mean that we leave our present state unattended. Acceptance means that we watch over it continuously by being aware. So do we not do the same thing with our child? We love our child, so we never leave him. Howsoever he may be, we watch every movement. And this is the same relationship with our beingness. We have to develop it and see how it flowers. How has it gotten to this stage? Is it by watching and observing daily and deeply as it forms? So we must continuously watch over our state of beingness. In the earlier verses, Ashtavakra has spoken about the witness. So we have to just continuously be watching and be the witness and keep the awareness going. And that brings us to the third stage. What happens when we are continuously aware, continuously observing our state of beingness? We will know that awareness, that continuous watching and observing, has resulted in our beingness changing form. This is where the interesting thing is. Our beingness has changed its nature, and this happens without any effort. This happens automatically. We are not changing anything here. We have simply observed. We have simply been aware. We have only kept a watch over our beingness. and that watching itself is within us. That watching, that acceptance, that loving leads us to the point where we see that the beingness is actually changing form. It has become something else. And as the beingness changes form, the I or the individual entity also changes form. The observer becomes the observed, because it is the nature of the observer to become the observed. So what have we done in these three stages of self-inquiry? We have been continuously aware and have observed our state of beingness and watched the beingness change form. The I automatically changes form. The I is completely dependent on that beingness. Absolutely. So there is no practice involved in this. Calling it a practice is merely making it into and implies that the ego and effort is involved. But we have not put in any ego and effort. We have only done one thing, which is watching and observing carefully and completely at every given opportunity. So practice may be restricted to a few hours in a day, but this watching and observing is done all the time. When looking matures and deepens, meditation happens automatically. Another mistake made by aspirants is in paying too much attention to the techniques of meditation and taking them as the goal. The technique becomes the goal rather than the means to achieve the goal. So the goal here is meditation, not mastering a certain technique used to reach that goal. But unfortunately, we all keep running to gurus and everything to just keep looking for some technique or the other, and that becomes the goal. So a spiritual aspirant or a practitioner must be careful not to get too attached to the practice of meditation or other dry techniques, and should rather sink effortlessly into the sense of being. In that effortless sinking, every technique, every mantra, every breath and prana disappear. And when that happens, the ego too disappears. And with the disappearance of the ego, what is going to happen? Meditation happens. Finally, when even the thought that I am meditating or I am doing this or that is gone, it means meditation has taken place. Meditation is the end of its own practice. So let's summarize it in 2 phrases. Do not meditate, just be. And do not think that you are, just be. So today we will end this session here with these 4 verses for today, and the rest we'll take up next time in the next part. Thank you so much for listening. Namaste.